Welcome to the Hey Docs podcast with your host, Jill Allen. Today, I am welcoming back Doug Copple, partner of Benson Copple Patterson and Associates, a firm that works with orthodontists across the country on practice transitions, partnerships, and long-term strategic planning. As the orthodontic market continues to evolve, more practices are exploring partnership structures as a way to grow, transition ownership, and create long-term continuity. In this episode, we're breaking down what's happening in the ortho transition market, how partnerships are typically structured, and what doctors should think about before entering into one of the most important business relationships of their careers. So let's jump in. This episode was brought to you by Gray Finch. Hey docs, if your new patient follow-up depends on someone remembering, it's leaking revenue. Gray Finch automates new patient follow-up, texts and emails go out automatically, and your treatment coordinator just checks their tasks list to see what needs a quick call or a more personalized message. That is one of the many reasons I recommend everyone take a look at Gray Finch. It isn't just a follow-up tool, it's a complete practice management software built to help you grow and scale. Stop leaking revenue and get $500 off your startup fee with the Jill Allen special at grayfinch.com/Jill Allen. Doug, I am so excited to have you back on Hey Docs. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back on, Jill. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, you're always, I shouldn't say this, but one of my favorite guests to have on. And it's always great that you're willing to come back on and share your knowledge with all of my listeners. In the event that somebody has not listened to a previous episode, does not know who you are, would you mind just a real quick what you do, how you got into this, and just give us a little bit of history on yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Jill. And it's an honor being on here. I used to do such a great job with these podcasts, so I'm just truly honored to even be a part of it. So thank you so much. And so a little bit of background on myself. I majored in accounting. I started out at big accounting firms before I got involved in the orthodontic community. And so I worked at the big public accounting firms for 4 or 5 years. And then Chris Benson contacted me out of the blue. And I joined Chris when we were just a little fledgling company back in 2004. So he and I have been doing this together. The name of our company now is Benson Copple Patterson and Associates, which is a little bit of a word salad there. But Chris is starting to slow down a bit. And Shannon Patterson's my other partner now, or she and I are co-partners now. And she's been with us. We've been partners for actually longer than people think because we just changed the name a couple of years ago. But we do valuations, transitions, and recruiting services for orthodontists throughout the country. And so any change of ownership, whether somebody wants to sell their entire practice to either relocate or retire or bring in a partner and do a partnership transaction or mergers or buying a competitor's practice, anything that relates to change of ownership. And also Shannon and her team do recruiting for orthodontists throughout the country. So even doctors that may not want to sell their practice yet, but they want to bring on an associate, we help recruiting to find doctors, buyers, and associates for practices. And my portion of the business is, again, with my accounting background, I really handle the heavy lifting with our valuation services and our transition services. So do the majority of the negotiations for the transactions and partnership deals and sales. So that's our background and our company in a nutshell. Been doing this since since 2004, so over 2 decades. That's where the gray is coming from.
Yeah, exactly. I always tell my hairdresser, what you tell me, it's a secret circle.
Right.
So I don't get to see my grays. That's basically what I'm saying.
Understand. We won't ask.
Yeah, it's so amazing when we look back at how long we've both been in this industry and just looking at the changes that continue to just evolve that is part of the industry and the space that you guys hold in working in all of these areas, very similar to what I do as well, but I'm not doing brokerage and transaction. It's more helping the doctors once they have decided to start the practice or have done the acquisition or getting ready to sell the practice and saying, okay, I got to get my P&Ls ready to go so I get the numbers that I want. You guys can help sell it. But I think it's always fun when we look at this because we really get to see that full life cycle orthodontic practice and what works all the way through, and how each doctor can really have a pretty big impact on what it's going to be from the start to the finish if they're thinking about everything in between. And so one of the areas that I wanted to focus on today, because I know we've talked about startups and we've talked about associateship partnerships and different things along the way, but I want to talk about the transition market right now and what you are seeing as far as partnerships and why we're seeing that, I think, become more common, and just kind of talking about, maybe I don't even want to say a shift in what's happening, but just some of the trends that you guys are starting to see in that area.
Yeah, probably multiple trends that we could talk about, but obviously the DSO market has had an big impact on the orthodontic market over the last over a decade now. Heartland was started back in the late 80s or early 90s. Then Smile Doctors really came and was the first orthodontic-centered or focused DSO, which we call OSOs now, orthodontic service organizations. And so I think they came on the scene around 2014 or 2015, and that's really had an impact. There's plenty more that are out there now. A lot of doctors are considering joining those practices. And along with that, we've seen a bigger increase or just in partnership deals. And I think some of that is a combination of some of the younger doctors coming out. They like that relationship with another doctor, the mentor relationship, and also the coverage and not doing this alone. You do think when you're a business owner, especially a solo business owner, you always feel like you're out on an island by yourself, making every decision. So I think that's some of the allure of DSOs. It's also become the allure of more and more partnerships, people sharing the burden and having coverage if you're out and being able to bounce ideas off of someone else. And so we're seeing a rise in orthodontic partnerships to compete also with the larger groups that are out there. And we looked at this last year before we went to the AAO, that used to be 20 to 25% of our transactions are partnership deals. Now it's more like 35%, sometimes closer to 40% year by year on partnership deals. And these partnership deals can take years to form. So we work with them for longer, and it's all ages of doctors. Everybody thinks about transition. That's when you turn 60 years old, you can start thinking about selling your practice. But we have doctors that are in their late 30s or early 40s that are talking about transition plans and creating partnership deals because their practices are growing so much. And that's the big trend we've been focusing on lately too. People are also looking at acquiring growth or expanding their practice. And one way to do that is sometimes through mergers, which end up being partnership deals, or buying another competitor's practice and bringing somebody in to expand. We're seeing all those trends that are really affecting the market.
Yeah. And I think it's just interesting when we think about what is impacting this. And I'm even seeing it, and this is one area that you didn't necessarily touch on, but I'm even seeing partnerships starting right from the beginning with my startups, where I'm seeing more and more doctors that are going in and saying, I don't know that I want to do this on my own right from the beginning, and I'm gonna start that up. Now I know that's a little different than the associate buying in, but I do think it's been an interesting shift even in what I see on the startup realm, where I am working with more and more doctors that are partnerships from the beginning, thinking about that long-term strategy.
That's interesting. Yeah, because usually the thing with partnerships is the cash flow. And so if you're splitting between two people with a startup, that's a little more difficult, but it can be a great situation. And we've actually even seen sometimes younger or older doctors, say older, doesn't mean really old, but they may bring in a younger doctor and they're starting another location. They're a partnership in that situation. So yeah, some of the startups are going that way. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just interesting. Nothing surprises me anymore, for sure. And we have definitely gone past the traditional way that things were done. There's a lot of different options out there now, for sure, for doctors and what they're going to do. So when partnerships I'll say when you and I think about kind of old school partnerships and how they were created to how they are being created now, can you kind of just talk through how are partnerships typically structured, and maybe things of the past, maybe some old ideas on how it was done to what is being done now and what is appealing if we do want to think about doing some type of a partnership ramp up in a practice?
Yeah, I will say now, and maybe it's somewhat similar even in the past, but typically what we see, and we work with a lot of doctors who it's one doctor practice. and they're bringing somebody younger in, and they're going to create a 2-doctor practice. So that's how the partnership is forming. Or maybe it's a 2-doctor practice that's becoming a 3-doctor practice. It's a little bit different, obviously, when you have maybe 2 doctors who are already partners, and one of them was going to retire and leave. So you have somebody come in to buy them out to replace that person. That's slightly different. But in every single one, we always recommend is that there's always an association period beforehand. And so when that doctor comes in, at the end of the day, this is a business marriage, right? And so we don't want anybody, we're not going to force anybody to get married. We don't want anybody entering into a marriage without really knowing the other person and understand what's going on. And so we always have that partnership, or we always have that association period before the buy-in starts. And usually we want it to be at least 12 months. Sometimes usually it's even longer than that. And if you're going from a 1-doctor practice to create a 2-doctor practice, in those situations, it just depends on the size of the practice. It may be that we need a growth threshold for the practice really to be big enough before the younger doctor buys in. In that case, we're going to value the practice before the young doctor gets in there. The price will be fixed. It will be fixed with maybe some adjustments for asset additions and things like that. But then once the growth threshold is hit, then the buy-in starts. And I would also say that it's almost always the case that these are some type of incremental buy-ins, just depending on the size of the practice and things. And sometimes you have the younger doctors that say, no, I should be 50-50 immediately. Why am I not getting to be 50-50? I'm paying half the value of the practice. The reality is there's only certain ways that the sellers would allow somebody to buy in and become an owner in their practice. And they're going to understand that structure. And at the end of the day, these practices usually value for, say, 2 times net. So to make that number easy, if you have a $2 million practice with $1 million of total income to the owner doctor, it may value at $2 million, right? So you think about somebody selling half of their business basically for 1 year's worth of income. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless the practice grows, right? And so there's various reasons to do these partnership deals. We always tell people that either you're trading money for time and you want to maybe extend your career, or no, hey, I'm going to take a big pay cut, but I want to do this to secure my retirement and allow me to practice a little longer. Or you're growing your practice so much you want that equity partner that's going to remain with you, that's going to be there long term with you. And so in those cases, you want the practice to grow, because ultimately, until the practice doubles, the selling doctor is taking some type of pay decrease, right? And so we usually have, again, we always have association periods. We may have the growth threshold, and then we usually have some type of incremental buy-in. So it takes some period of time before the young doctor becomes 50-50 equal with them. And so it's not like we're trying to squeeze every dollar out of the buyer. It's just we're trying to look at both parties' perspectives and make sure this is going to work. And one of the biggest pieces is the financial ramifications of both the doctors, right? We tell people, doesn't matter how much you like each other, right? You can love each other all you want to, but if both of you aren't comfortable with the financial outcome of this, you're going to have resentment and this thing's going to fall apart. So we always want to make sure that's one of the biggest things we look at. Now, again, let's say you have a 2-doctor practice already and somebody's joining to replace that doctor. You're still going to have that association period because the remaining partner wanted to make sure you're the right fit for the business. And there still may be some type of still may be some type of difference between the remaining doctor and the new doctor coming in. But you usually don't have to have so much of a growth because it's already a 2-doctor practice, right? Or a 3-doctor, whatever it may be. So that's overall what we see. There's variations that we've had some older doctors before that say, I'm 62. If I don't get somebody in here, I can't do this much longer. And so maybe they'll sell 50% immediately, but there's also a trade-off with that to say, hey, young doctor, you're going to work more than me. I'd like to work 3 days a week. You're going to work 4, but we'll do 50-50 straight up. And then eventually you can buy me out. So those are the various things that we see. And I do always want to point out that when you have the buyers or the buyers of buyers request that, hey, they need to be 50-50 immediately. There's not many advisors out there that are willing to sell half of their business to a young professional coming out that's been there 6 or 12 months. So just keep that in mind, that these are the livelihoods of the doctors, and it's got to make financial sense for everybody.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you can, that was great. And I think it was a good overview of how this is going to work. And I'm wondering if we could dial that in even more so. And you could kind of give a general of what are you suggesting? I know you said it could be as little as a year, but when we're looking at that buy-in period, would you mind giving us, yes, there could be the fringes that go on.
Yeah.
What does that time frame look like? Also, just to give doctors who are listening that may be thinking about this partnership opportunity, even just what does it look like from ownership being divided? What does that look like? And I know you said most docs won't start with just a 50% right from the beginning, but there's also probably a division of, like, I'm asking, what does that
Yes.
look like? How is
Profit
that
allocations and things like that.
Yes, exactly. And then what happens with income as either that period is ramping up, or when it comes to an end, and was it evaluated differently in the beginning or at the end? Like, do you mind breaking that down a little bit? Because I feel like these are all the kind of gray areas where I think people can kind of, oh, I heard this in the Facebook group, and oh, I heard this on this group, and I think it gets a little muddy.
No, it does. It does. So you hear so many different things, right? I've even had clients that have referred other clients to me. And the new one that comes in says, my buddy told me that you sold his practice for 150% of collections and did all this other stuff. And it was great. It's like, no, it's not exactly how it happened, right? So sometimes the stories between the doctors get a little fuzzy too.
Yeah.
So I would say, let's say a more common one that we do. And we never do cookie cutter stuff because we always want to understand the actual goals behind everything and everybody's financial situation. But a typical one may be that somebody starts the practice in June, July, after they finish their residency. They're a partner or they're an associate for, say, 18 months, and then get to buy in January 1 of a year and a half later. And with that, we would value the practice before the doctor gets into the practice typically. So that price is set right before they step in. And then we say, okay, because your goal is to continue to grow the practice, right? The doctor that is there now can manage the practice doing what it's doing, right? So they don't need you if this thing doesn't grow. And so again, maybe it's a growth threshold before that buy-in actually happens. But let's just say it's 18 months or so. So it's on the right track. Everybody knows it's on the right track. We're achieving the objectives we want. And then usually we do something like that doctor then gets to buy 25% ownership interest in the practice, okay? And then a set time period later, 3, maybe 4 years later, they get to buy another 25%. So it takes them 4 to 5 years to become equal with the incumbent doctor that's in the practice, okay? During that time, and we usually have that first 50% set on the valuation. Now, again, if there's adjustment, there could be adjustments in there. Say, for example, if they decide to go buy a brand new, nice x-ray machine, that original valuation is going to be adjusted for that long-term asset that's going to be used for the next 10 years. Or even we've had situations where they say, we're going to do another location. And so they go build another location for $500,000 before the young doctor buys in. And that's really an investment in the future. So that price will be adjusted for that investment in that new office location or buying a competitor. Okay. So then when they buy in, they buy 25%. We typically then have the profit allocation split based upon a portion of it based upon days worked. And then the other portion may be based upon ownership interest or maybe something slightly different. It just depends on the size of the practice. And so let's say, to make it easy, let's just say you have $200 of profit that can be split between the two doctors, okay? We put that into 2 pools of money. 50% of that, or $100, is then paid to each of those 2 doctors based upon the number of days worked. So if they're working the same number of days, they get $50 each of that pool of money. The other $100, the second pool of money, is split maybe based upon ownership interest. So if it's 75-25, then it's $75, or I can't remember the math there. But basically, that other $100 then is split, 75-25. So it ends up that the 75% owner is getting, what is that, $175, I can't remember, $125 versus $75 of the income, okay? So some people say, shouldn't you just base it on ownership interest? That I'm a 25% owner, or the young doctor is going to be a 25% owner. Shouldn't they just get 25% of the overall profits? That can't really work. You've got to have that clinical pool in there. Because remember, they were a 0% owner and you're still paying them a salary, right? And if you think about the easiest example to think about, let's say you've got a practice that's throwing off $1 million of income to the doctors. And if you have an associate come in that's going to be getting paid, I'm just going to use $250,000 as a salary, right? If they bought in at 25%. Now they paid $500,000 or whatever it is, $1 million for this 25% interest. And if they only get 25% of the $1 million of profit, they're still making $250,000 like they were making as an associate. Now all they have is debt service. So you're trying to split that $1 million based upon days worked, your clinical pool, and then some type of ownership pool. Now, I will say there's some situations based upon the size of the practice and things like that. We may allocate that second pool of money, maybe like a 10% per year increase to the younger doctor. Okay. So there's some differentials in there, and there's reasons for that I'm not going to get all the way into here. But basically, you're just trying to define that there's got to be a way to reasonably and equitably divide that income. The other reason I talk about those incremental increases is we're trying to structure these even though these are very complicated transactions, a lot of things going on, we don't want people to have a transaction every single year. If you're actually selling 10% per year and you're having to do the legal documents and the accounting work and go to get a loan every year, you just can't do that. So some of this is based upon just a method that makes sense. At the end of the day, we're trying to shift money between the two doctors that makes it fair and reasonable. And everybody's going to pull their weight, right? And just probably another topic on this, but we always tell the young doctors, you got to act like an owner before you're allowed to become an owner. And so going the extra mile to make sure you're involved. This isn't just checking in at 7:30 and leaving at 5. You got to be involved. And if you don't do those things, you're not going to have the opportunity to buy into the practice anyway. So those are, I would say, the sort of a normal process. But we also have sometimes things in there about, especially for maybe a larger practice or maybe 2 or 3 doctor or 3 or 4 doctor practice, where if you have one person that's clearly the managing partner and that's doing more things, you may have a third pool of money, C-suite compensation or admin days worked on top of clinical days work. So there's various ways to allocate the income to reflect really what's going on in the practice.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for breaking that down. And again, I know, and probably anybody listening understands that there's a lot of ways that you can make this work. But I think just having that basic understanding, and I love what you said about you can't be an owner until you act like an owner. And that is so true. And I think that is such a big shift when you go from being an associate who, that can be a very appealing position, I think, because you get to show up, you get to do your thing, and you get to go home. But you don't have to think about, you don't get the weight of the practice on your shoulders on Friday night, Saturday morning, Sunday morning, like you do as a business owner. And I think as you start to take that step towards ownership, just starting to think like an owner and picking the brain of your partner and carrying some of that burden on, we are going to grow this practice. What do I have to bring to the table? It isn't just them continuing to do the heavy lifting. So I love what you said there.
We could probably think about specific examples all day, right? But I remember I had one doctor who was visiting one of our clients to think about buying in, and they had dinner that night with their spouses. Then the owner doctor had a computer issue and had to go to a satellite office that night to work on some stuff and didn't get home till 11. And the younger doctor and his spouse are both like, man, does he do this all the time? Does he want to do this? And he doesn't want to, right? But when things like that pop up, you have to, right? You can't just check out. So no, it's obviously, you have to think about those things. Yeah. One other thing I will say, we talked about that structure. It's so hard to talk about those things in the abstract, right? And think about it. So I will say that's why we always do partnership projections, like financial modeling, to actually show everybody, because what I said probably sounds like a foreign language or word salad to some people. So you want to put that on paper to really illustrate, here's what we're saying is happening, and here's what you can expect. So you can see if I buy in at this percentage with this cost and have this loan and this profit allocation model, and these are my tax ramifications, this is what I can expect. And that way everybody can get on the same page. And that helps everybody understand.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. And again, it's not just a handshake and a wink, and we're going to get there. I think everybody needs to see that and see the work that it takes to make those projections work out. And now a word from the sponsors who make this podcast possible. Are you thinking about opening an orthodontic practice? I know, it's a big decision, but saving 25% on the ADEC equipment you need to get started, that's an easy one. Because ADEC has a special program called Smart Start, designed to help you launch your first practice. You get up to 25% off your ADEC orthodontic equipment and furniture. You also get complimentary services to help you run and grow your business. And my favorite part, access to the Smart Start pricing for 2 whole years after you open your doors. That gives you flexibility to add more chairs as your cash flow grows. It's pretty smart. As an orthodontist, you care about getting all the little details right, and ADEC really got it right with this program. So if starting off with a big savings on ADEC equipment sounds good to you, the ADEC Smart Start is definitely worth a closer look. Just follow the link in the show notes to learn more. docs, let's talk about Smile Suite, because it's not just another scheduling system. It's a game changer in the world of new patient management. And as a proud Smile Suite partner, I've witnessed the incredible impact it has on practices of all sizes. Smile Suite means your new patient calls and web leads are expertly handled 7 days a week, even during nights and weekends. And they offer top-notch customizable presentation software and seamless post-consultation follow-up. It's like having a secret weapon for your practice's success. Curious? Dive into the revolution at getsmilesuite.com. And don't forget to mention Hey Docs to unlock some extra goodies. Elevate your practice with Smile Suite, because every smile deserves a suite of excellence. I'm wondering if you can now talk a little bit about, I don't know, just some of the key operating and tax considerations that doctors need to think about when they are saying, hey, I think I want to form a partnership, because I've got to imagine there's got to be some tax issues that we got to think about.
There are, and there's usually two ways to do it, like an asset transaction, creating new entities and things, or you can do some type of stock buy-in model. And there's different tax ramifications of that. But at the end of the day, from the seller's point of view, what they're trying to do is get capital gains in the transaction, right? And not pay ordinary income, because capital gains rates, the highest federal tax rate is 20%, plus whatever your state income tax rate is. Ordinary income tax rate can be 37% plus any payroll taxes, employer and employee payroll taxes that you have on top of that. So there's a big difference in the tax rate. So ultimately, the seller's trying to get capital gains. From the buyer's point of view, they want to make sure they're getting tax deductibility. And if I'm paying $500,000 to buy into this practice, I want to make sure I'm getting some tax deductions to offset my income that I'm receiving from it and the loan payments that I'm making. And so typically that's the balancing act. And we're usually trying to do some type of asset transaction that allows the seller to, for a large portion of the purchase price, receive capital gains treatment. And then from the buyer's perspective, to be able to write off usually all of the entire purchase price over some period of time. And it also allows for flexibility of payment terms and things like that. So stock sales are always the worst for the buyer. Okay. If you sell stock, the seller receives all capital gains, but the buyer receives no tax deductibility. So we usually try to avoid those or make them really alter the structure to allow some deductibility for the buyer. And there's a lot of ways you can manipulate that, okay? But again, the capital gains versus deductibility and everything is the big key there. And then I will point out too, for family members, related party taxation is much different than unrelated party taxation. The IRS looks at family members so much differently than two unrelated parties. Two unrelated parties can shake hands and sell for a 50% discount if they want to. But then if two family members do that, then it's considered a gift, or it could go against their estate and things like that.
Crazy.
There's also, just like even amortization of goodwill purchases between family members is not usually allowed. So it either ends up being converted to ordinary income for the selling doctor or not deductible to the buying doctor. So with family transactions, you really want to make sure that that's looked at and is structured properly to allow for maximum deductibility and reduction in taxes. And there's ways to get around that. So just one thing to be very aware of for family members.
That is such a good point, and I have never thought about that when I have my younger ducks coming in and saying, hey, I'm purchasing my dad's practice or my mom's practice or this, that, or the other, or going to partner in with an eventual buyout or whatnot. I just want to go down a rabbit hole for a minute with that, because it just has never even dawned on me that, which is probably bad on my part, that we really need to be, it isn't just a transaction. We really have to be thinking about that and the impacts of the taxation component and how that is set up. And I guess my leading in question is, should doctors be reaching out to a group like you, even if it is a family transaction like that, to say, how do we best structure this versus just, I'm coming in and I'm taking over the practice.
Yeah. I would say yes. Obviously, right? But some CPAs will handle it, and they might do gifting, which can be fine too. And especially if you're under the estate tax limitations before you start paying estate taxes and things like that. But most people are trying to preserve those to make sure that they have the maximum deductibility and the estate tax limits in place when they were to pass away. Yes, I would say look at that, because there's things There's anti-churning rules that the IRS enforces. There's controlled entities issues, which the anti-churning rule says that if a related party buys goodwill from another related party, you can't amortize that goodwill unless the selling doctor pays the highest ordinary income tax rate. That's the whole purpose of selling goodwill, right? Is to get those two things, deductibility and capital gains rates. There's also things about with the controlled entities situations where the buyer may not be able to deduct the purchase price paid, or if let's say the mother or father decides to sell or finance the transaction, they could end up having to pay the full gain on the sale of the assets in the year of the sale, even though they're going to sell or finance it over a period of time. Because usually that's what's called the installment method, which means the IRS says you can recognize the income as you receive the money. So if you sell or finance something over 7 years, and it's really the capital gains piece of it, as you receive that money over the next 7 years, you'll pay the tax as you receive it. In family transactions, it could be that the selling doctor has to recognize the entire gain in the year of the sale and pay the tax on it. And so you just want to be aware of those things. And again, there's ways around most of them usually, but I just want to make sure they're all in place and everybody's aware of them. And I will say it's nothing against the CPAs, but we have seen some CPAs that don't know all these rules and they are complicated. So you just want to be aware of them. And sometimes you can't get around them, but you want to know what the situation is if you have a big tax liability you wasn't aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to your point about the CPAs, I see enough doctors and this is going to sound like a slam a little bit, but there are definitely ones that understand our industry and understand the level of complexity of this. And there are others that are like the family friends that have been, we're just kind of plugging along doing the taxes and don't understand the complexity of what this transaction is going to look like. And I think to any of our listeners out there, if you are setting up to be in that situation, and or maybe you've got some friends that are, this is probably a good episode to be like, you need to listen to this and at least give Doug a call and be like, okay, let me just make sure we're on the right track here.
And a lot of it is it's not even that the CPAs don't know, right? It's just that they don't communicate enough and they're just trying to get the tax work done and they're trying to make sure everything's okay. But the doctor doesn't know to tell them some of these things. And so they could be involved more if they were allowed to be, but it's like we could all do much better financial planning, right? But it actually means you got to be proactive and let your financial planner know what's going on and talk to them. So some of it's just that, right? So you want to make sure the communication is happening and is planned for. There's no surprises, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to switch gears a little bit and I want to talk about partnerships as, okay, we've made the decision where we've got the buy-in happening now. We're past associate, we're into the buy-in process. And I want you to talk a little bit about just what that looks like in real world decisions in a practice and how successful partnerships handle things like who gets final authority on decisions or who's responsible for what, or I want to go buy that new car and roll it into the practice and this, that, or the other. I'd love for you to talk about that because I see this can become a real sticky situation sometimes if we aren't clear about how we're going to handle these things.
No, it's very interesting, right? Because even in the deals that we do, like you're incrementally buying in, we may have one doctor that has voting control for a period of time. And it's a double-edged sword. I could talk out of both sides of my mouth here and take positions on either side. And so from the seller's point of view, sometimes when we have voting control for the senior doctor for, say, for some period of time, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, the young doctor says that's not fair. The response could also be, well, you're also joining this practice for a reason, right? And this doctor's been very successful, and so they should be able to continue to operate the practice, and you should trust them to do that. But even if I say that, what I'm telling the senior doctor too is, remember, this is a partnership. It doesn't matter if you have voting control or not. If you're always pulling your trump card, this thing's going to fail. And so you got to talk about these things. You got to get them on the same page. No matter what the decision is, you need to act like partners. And even when we have somebody with voting control, there's always usually a list of things that says this must be unanimously agreed upon, which may be bringing a doctor, another associate, selling ownership interest in the practice, entering into big contracts, relocating the offices, things like that, to make sure that you guys have to be on the same page on these things. It doesn't matter if there's a minority owner or not. But I just try to stress to them that you need to get each other on the same page. And that almost needs to start even during the association period too. If you know that they're going to become partners, you want to involve them in the decision-making process. One, so they know what's going on. too. So they're ready to make these decisions too as they become involved in the practice. So we still sometimes have voting control in practices, but you have those speeches and make sure everybody's on the same page. But ultimately, like say, I want to fire this person, for example. Ultimately, that may come down to one person making the decision if you can't quite get on the same page, but you need to have multiple discussions about it before that decision is made. Now, I will say we've had some really large successful practices doing 10, 12, 13 million a year. And obviously there's one doctor who is the lead person. I had one large practice that he was the leader and the executive of the group, really handled most of the decision making, and he was still the biggest producer in the practice. And it was very clear, and everybody was okay. Like he gets to make the majority of the decisions, right? And so it's just something to be aware of. Other things to think about, like discretionary expenses, are a big one. Like you were talking about, and say, hey, I want a Honda Accord allowance here. Driving the Porsche over here, I've got an issue with that. So the one thing is, depending on how we structure it, they may actually have separate entities that they're running their discretionary expenses through their own corporation or entity. And so the doctors don't even see what the other one's doing. So, but at the end of the day, when you own your own practice, it's completely up to you, right? You can do whatever you want to. You can put your kids on payroll. You can, if you own the facility, you can pay yourself excess rent for tax planning, go on vacations and say it's continuing education, take your best friend who's not a dentist out for golf all the time, right? So you can do all those things. Or if you have more money in your bank account, it's just distribute it out to myself. When you become a partner, that's no longer the case. You have to consider, how does me spending money affect the other doctor? And we try to tell people, ultimately, put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? If they were to spend that money and expect you to pay half of it, would you be okay with that? And so those things are usually tracked and charged against their share of the income, or they're within their own companies. It's not always the two biggest ones, but the two biggest ones I talk to people about are really marketing and CE, right? If your best friend is the biggest referral of the practice, or your partner's best friend is the biggest referral of the practice, you probably shouldn't get upset with him if he's taking him out to golf and dinner a lot, right? Let him have those expenses. That's a big piece of the practice. Continuing education, typically we say that should go against your own side of the money. But hey, if one of you both decided you're going to go to this conference to learn all this stuff and bring it back to the practice and then implement it, maybe that's a practice shared expense, right? So you just have to be aware of those and track them as best you can. At the end of the day, this becomes a mathematical calculation. You got to track it and make sure you know how to handle it. And as long as you're tracking it, then you can decide what's the difference and how do we handle this, versus if you don't track it and you're hiding it from each other, that's where a lot of the issues come in. Another one, talking about like control and what tears people apart. We've had partners just really get upset with like just credit card points. If somebody's buying in and I want him to buy in, but I keep all the credit card points. I'm like, we're talking like $3,000 a year. Really? This should just be shared. Why are we having such a big issue about this? You guys are both doing pretty well. So again, think about that. If the other person was really taking that strong of a stance, would you be upset about it? And at the end of the day, that's what we try to do in a lot of these deals, is we're trying to make each person understand the other one's perspective, right? And what you're requesting, usually to your benefit, means it's coming out of the pocket of the other doctor. And so you got to be aware of that. And how would you feel? And just try to be as fair as you can. And if you can't, and most partnerships fail because of either money, just normal marriages, money, or decision making, where they're not agreeing on things. They're not, communication, because they're not communicating to make decisions together. We just try to stress that as much as we can.
Yeah. Doug, I think those are all such good points. I want to bring up just one more, and I want you to talk about this one for just a second, because I do see this a lot with my younger docs going in and having that partnership opportunity with a senior doc that maybe has been practicing for a while. And where I see maybe some rubs or people getting a little upside down is differences in treatment philosophies and how money is going to be spent. If we've got a practice that we'll just say was a very analog practice, and we've got a younger doc coming in that has been trained and wants to do digital and wants to bring in this, that, or the other. And just that, okay, I can manage this for a while as an associate, but now that I've got this partnership opportunity and we're moving towards ownership now and we're into that, I want to start bringing this in. And I kind of see this like where people just kind of get a little sideways on philosophies and it's worked this way. Why should we bring this in? And I'm wondering, have you guys had to start dealing with this a little bit? Because I think this is all part of that. We got to put all our cards on the table and talk about this.
Yeah.
Or it's not going to work.
No, I agree. That's when we try to say, can you call Jill Allen or somebody like that to figure out what you need to do? No, because that is a challenge. And so we've seen it that sometimes we have had people that are like, I don't do any aligners and I don't want to, but I'm going to bring the new partner in and they're going to do that. And then they do have a little bit of rub about, God, I'm what, $200-$300 a case on my brackets and you're spending $1,600-$1,700-$1,800 on a lab fee. But I think they have to get on the same page with that. We have seen it that's just part of the growth model. And if you're not cannibalizing your other normal treatment starts and you're doing this with aligners, that's how we're growing. So we have to take this into account. Hopefully you got some fixed costs that will stay the same and sort of offset some of that. And some of the young doctors have not been trained on this type of stuff. I remember we had one doctor buying a practice that still did paper charts and he goes, really, how do I do paper charts? And you get out a pen and paper and you write stuff down, right? But they haven't been trained on the non-technological stuff. And so they're used to the digital workflow. But I think that's just something they have to evolve into. And I probably would recommend, hey, you do need to talk to a consultant to get you guys on the same page. Okay. Because we have seen a lot of our partnerships end up not having separate patient pools. They end up sharing a patient base. So that's why I was talking about like the profit allocation. A lot of times ends up being on days worked. You end up having separate patient pools. You can do, okay, this is my production or my collection. So we get paid on that with some ownership pool too. But we have seen some practices when they do have some separate patient pools like that, or one doctor's heavy aligners and the other one doctor is not, they do actually track those expenses then. So you end up having 2 practices within one or 3 or 4 practices within one, depending on the number of doctors. And then they get very specific. And like I said, it's all about tracking, right? So maybe here's my collections, here's my clinical staff, here's my aligner bills, and here's the other things that I'm doing. And then they have the other expenses like rent and things that they're sharing 50-50 because that's just a fixed cost. But I would say the majority of our practices are sharing patient pools. So they end up having to get on the same page with that. Again, otherwise you're really having to track that. And I would say you guys got to get on the same page. You just have to and figure out what you want to do. You end up being separate and doing your own thing. And because then they don't want to touch the other's patient anyway. And so we've seen some successful practices like that too. So it's just, again, to me, it's a matter of tracking it and understanding it and be on the same page, because otherwise it could end up falling apart. We've seen people do that. So we're not doing enough and we have 2 locations. Why don't you just start going over here and I'll go over there and we'll go our separate ways.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the bottom line is if you're looking at doing a partnership, whether you're the buying in partner or the doc that's bringing in, there's got to be give and takes. It's a lease. We got to have everybody or giving a little bit to get to that middle ground. So that it's going to be successful. So I know you and I could just keep going and keep keep talking. But the last question that I just want to talk about, because I'm sure Jill, this is a burning question for me, but let's talk just a little bit about the financing perspective. Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit about the buy-ins and whatnot, but how are they typically funded? And I think, are doctors just expected to have this lump of cash? Are they going out and getting a loan? Is it coming out of their salary? What does that look like? And to make this even more complicated of an answer for you, what happens if there's real estate involved? So we're not just talking about buying into a practice, but now we've got real estate that is part of this deal as well.
Yeah, so let me talk about the real estate first very quickly, because the real estate is always a separate transaction from the partnership with the orthodontic practice. So the young doctor has to think this is just like any other lease, right? That as long as the rental rate is okay and it's fair market value, then it's a separate transaction. And usually we want them to go through the fair market appraisal process to talk to some realtors, say, hey, are you at the correct rental rate for this office? Because we want to make sure we're including that in the valuation and the operating expenses. Anything in excess of that is really a discretionary expense for the owner doctor. And usually, if they're allowed to buy into the real estate, it's after some period of time, usually after they become equal. Because what they don't want is you have a buy-in and then something happens and then they decide, oh, this isn't working and now you got to get out of the real estate deal too. Yeah. But I would say sometimes it's even the selling doctor, that could be part of the retirement plan. So it's just a negotiated piece and it's separate. We're not real estate brokers. And so we end up handling a lot of it in the transaction. But I try to tell people this is a separate thing that we can talk about, but There's no promises as you're buying in, right? As long as it's a fair lease. Then the other one then is about financing. And depending on how you structure it, is it a stock sale, is it an asset sale? We do sometimes have income shifts in the buyout where we take some of the income that should be going to the young buying partner and it's shifted to the selling doctor as compensation or as payment for the purchase price. We usually try to avoid that because the tax ramifications are not great for the seller. We're really shifting a lot of the tax burden to the seller. And so usually if we structure them as an asset sale with what we call a partnership of professional corporations, which is like a 3-entity type structure, and create some new entities, usually there is flexibility that the young doctor can go to a bank and get a loan and pay the selling doctor in cash, or the seller can elect to finance it just like he's a bank in those normal loan terms, okay? Mm-hmm. Little nuance about this, I could probably spend 15 or 20 minutes talking about this, but the things to know is that we've got to stress with the seller is if your buyer, your future partner, goes and gets a loan from the bank, that bank is not going to loan the money unless they have a lien on the operating assets of the practice. And those operating assets are now co-owned by you and your partner, right? And so that means in some way, shape, or form, the seller is somehow guaranteeing it. It's usually a corporate guarantee, not a personal guarantee. So some sellers are not satisfied with that, or they're not okay with that. They're like, hey, if I'm going to take on the risk, I'd rather just get paid the interest and I'll seller finance it. So if something happens, I can deal directly with my buyer and get my ownership back or whatever it may be. The problem with that sometimes is that sellers say, hey, I want to loan this at prime rate, or I want to make 8%. And right now the lending market is, some of these young doctors can get interest rates at 4.7%, under 5%. And so then the sellers, I'm not going to match that. And the buyer's saying, I'm not going to pay a lot more for this. I can get a loan. So that's just a negotiating process to figure out, hey, we usually tell the buyer, go talk to some banks and then let's see what the terms are. And then the seller can decide what they want to do. But I've had too many to count where I've explained that heavily to the seller and tell them this is what's going to happen. And then we get to the signing process and they see what the bank's making them sign. And like, I'm not going to do this. Like, we've talked about this a lot. So I would say it can be a cash transaction, but you just got to understand all the nuance with it. And the other thing is, let's say if the seller has loans outstanding already in the practice, with that bank, their lender already has a first lien position on the operating assets. So that means the buyer, if they get another loan, the seller has to use those proceeds to pay off their loan and release the lien, or they got to use the same bank that the seller already has in place. So yeah, there's a lot of little detail in there that you can talk through. But I would say in this interest rate environment, you're on the fence. After COVID, rates went down to 2.75%, and no seller financed that. That's 2.75%. They say, give me cash. I'll deal with the risk with the bank and another bank being involved. Because it's a pretty safe loan too. It's not too risky as long as the practice keeps doing what it's supposed to do, and the buyer has the money to pay the loan, right? So unless they're just a terrible person and refuse to pay the bank back, it's a pretty risk-free loan that they can get because it's going to be paid by the cash flows of the practice.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for explaining that. I know somebody was like, Jill, why didn't you ask this question earlier? So there you go. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So again, I know you and I, a cocktail party, we could just sit and talk, but I know we're going to have to bring this to a close here. So if somebody wants to learn more about Benson Copple Patterson, what you guys are doing, if they are looking at any of the different items that you guys represent, what's going to be the best way that they can get a hold of you or Shannon or anybody else on the team to get some answers?
Yes. So website is the easiest way, bcp-advisors.com, or what our email addresses are the same at bcp-advisors.com, or Shannon at bcp-advisors.com, Chris, same thing. So emails, telephone, all the contact information is on the website. That's the easiest way. We also have the web inquiries, so send us an email through the website.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you again. This is, as always, I love having you on. I love just the information. And I know a lot of people let me go back and re-listen to that and get that information. So just thanks for what you guys do in this space. And, I think you do such a good job from representing my startup docs through my associates, through my acquisition docs that are like, I'm going to buy a practice.
Thank you. And it's like I said, it's such an honor to be on here. You're such a wealth of information. You give everybody a voice to tell their story on your podcast. I really appreciate it. And I know we've had some great mutual clients. And so we speak highly of you and just really appreciate you having me on here.
Yes, absolutely. All right. You know how I like to finish up our Hey Docs. I know everyone's, it's a speed round.
Yes.
I'll keep it easy on you today. So here we go. You ready?
Yes.
All right. What is one business trend you think more people should be paying attention to right now?
All right. This is the easy cop out, right? Because I hear it all the time, but I do think it's true. The AI boom. You're seeing it more and more. There's so many things that you can do with it. We're still trying to learn it here, but it's not just how it can make you more efficient. I also think about how's it going to change the orthodontic industry in the future with competition. I mean, through the aligner companies that are using it to get smarter at the treatment they can provide. Competitors will be using it to do more and more orthodontics, pediatric dentists, and GPs. And so just understanding all the technologies that's out there to make yourself more efficient, be able to do more with less is just, it's all over the place. And I know everybody's answered that same question like that, but that's where everything's headed. So you really got to stay on top of it.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. All right. What is one industry challenge that you think is going to shape the way we're working? Challenge.
Oh, gosh. Let me think about that. I think from our perspective, what I see is still the DSO market that is still out there. There's going to be more consolidation of some of the smaller groups that are out there. There's going to be some that probably still don't do well. There's some that did not do well and had a little bit of a consolidation and some issues with doctors there and getting their ownership back and things like that. We went from seeing a lot of doctors, that's what they wanted to do, and that's what they did. They joined some of the bigger DSOs. Now we're seeing some doctors who were in the DSOs and now they're trying to find more practices to buy. Or you have the young doctors who have been working in a DSO for 3 or 4 years and they're like, I'm ready to get out. We're also seeing, we've worked with some DSOs that are selling non-productive locations. So I still think that that's going to continue to change the market. And I'm not bashing the DSOs. I think it's a great exit strategy for a lot of doctors. You just understand why you're doing it and the risks that are involved and how it's overall changing the marketplace. So they're going to be the ones heavy in marketing and AI utilization and things like that. So how will they affect the overall market for single doctors is still evolving over time. But I still think there's so many single doctors that are doing so well and they're not going away anytime soon. But it seems like the DSOs are really can alter the landscape quite a bit with achievements or wins or failures and the way they can market and do various things in their practice that maybe it's not as easy for individual doctors to easily adopt.
Yep.
And adapt to.
Yeah, I think you're right on with that. All right, final one. This will be an easy one. If you could give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would you give? What would you tell yourself?
Oh, man. I'm still probably trying to tell myself this more because I probably rely on other people, Shannon and Chris in my business, but really to understand that really business is all about relationships and sales, right? We focus so much on mastering our trade with the technical aspect of it. But after you get really good at your trade, it's all you're building your practice based upon, or your business based upon relationships and really selling yourself and selling your services. And we say that to young doctors all the time, is you probably know how to straighten teeth pretty well. You still got a lot to learn, but you've never sold a case. And it doesn't matter how good you are as an orthodontist, you've got to get out there and build relationships and sell yourself. And I wish I'd have focused on that more when I was younger and still need to focus on it more now, right?
For sure. Doug, thank you so much for being on Hey Docs. This was great. And again, just you and the team, you guys always stand in the space really well and do a great job. So thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you again for having me. Really appreciate it. And look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.
All right. Bye-bye.